Hello, everyone. I am here with Reyna Grande, author of our Battle Creek Reads, Distance Between Us. I'm going to turn it over to Reyna to just talk about herself and her amazing memoir, which everyone has read.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be able to be here with you today to share this space and welcome you into my office here in California. I wish I was there in person to be able to meet and greet you all. But this, gives us still the opportunity to be able to share a little time together. And I'm so much looking forward to answering your questions about my book. Thank you so much to the Wheeler Library for hosting this event and for sharing my book with the community. And for me, it's such an honor to be able to talk about immigration, to be a voice for my immigrant community, and just to share with my readers, a little bit more insight and more humanity into this very controversial issue of immigration. For me, like, it has been such a magical journey. I really do think that my life, even though it's been difficult at times, it has also been very magical. And when I wrote The Distance Between Us, it really allowed me to think more deeply about the events that I had lived through, the experiences I had gone through, and to come to a place of gratitude, gratitude for the life that I have lived, because even though it was full of challenges, it has also been a very rewarding life. Um, sometimes people ask me, like, what would you change if you could go back in time? What would you change about your life? And it's hard to answer that, because as I wrote the book, I realized that everything that I had gone through brought me to where I am today, and I like who I am today. I like my life. I like my career. I have been so blessed to be able to have this career as a professional writer. And I know that because of these things that I went through, they all led up to me being here, right? And I just don't see me being, if I could change anything, I'm afraid that then I would be changing who I am and where I'm at. So if anything, I'm just really grateful for the opportunities that I've had in my life, grateful for the very hard lessons that I learned along the way. I'm grateful for the people in my life, even the people that try to hold me back. I learned so much from interacting with them, from those experiences. And all I can do now is to be able to move forward, live the life that the way I want to live it, and just celebrate who I am, celebrate where I come from, celebrate, my identity as an immigrant, as a Latina, as a Mexican woman, as a, writer, mother, wife, sister, daughter, all of these things that make me who I am. So, thank you so much once again for reading The Distance Between Us. This book, took me about 4 years to write. Before that, I wrote two novels. The Across 100 Mountains was my first novel, and Dancing with Butterflies was my second novel. And the reason why it took me, until my third book to write a memoir was because when I first started writing, um, I wanted to write my memoir, but at the time I was still fairly young, and I had just gone through all this trauma. I hadn't yet processed it yet, and it was too painful. The pain was too raw. So instead, what I ended up doing, instead of writing my memoir, I turned to fiction and I wrote a novel. And that was when I wrote Across 100 Mountains, which is this book. And I started writing this book when I was an undergrad at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and it was my senior project. So I wanted to write my own story of immigration. I wanted to write about my life in Mexico and what it was like for me and my siblings when my father immigrated and then when my mother also immigrated. But I decided I wasn't yet ready to tell that story. So instead, I wrote a novel that was somewhat inspired by those experiences, but because it was fiction, it allowed me to then turn it into an exploration of not the life that I lived, but the life I might have lived, I could have lived if my father had never come back for me. So then this story became a story of a young girl in Mexico whose father comes to the US to look for work and he never returns. And in this book, I was able to explore my deepest fear as a child, which was what would have happened to me if my father had never come back. What would my life had been? So I turned the whole novel into that exploration of my fear. Um, then after that, I followed it with my next novel, which was the distance, the Dancing with Butterflies. And in this novel, again, I explore immigration. I use my own experiences to give life to my immigrant character. But because it was a novel, it also allowed me to write about other experiences that I've never had that still touch on immigration and still reflect, the very difficult experiences of immigrants. But I wasn't beholden to just telling my own story. I was able to then include other things that were happening to other immigrants, things that I was reading about in the news or, things like that. So after I finished that second novel, I felt more confident as a writer in writing my memoir. And that was when I began to work on The Distance Between Us. It still took me 4 years to write it because I didn't know what I was doing. I was a novelist coming into memoir, having never taken any memoir writing classes. I never took any like creative nonfiction classes. So I didn't really know how to approach the book in those terms. So I ended up approaching the book the way I approach my novels, as a novelist. And I used all of the tools that I had learned to write my novels, to write The Distance Between Us. And I think that's why like a lot of people tell me when they read my book that it reads like a novel. And it's because I ended up using a lot of the same techniques that I had learned in writing my novels. And one of the things that I found, a little challenging was how when I write novels, the first thing I do is to map out my plot, right? Like I have to figure out like where does the story begin, where does the story end, what are the major plot points, and then from there I start writing the story. And with the memoir, it's such a different approach because in fiction, you kind of start from nothing and then you start creating the story and the situation and, you create your plot points. With memoir, I realize it's the opposite because you start with too much. Like you have so many memories, but memoir, even though it begins with memory, it's not a collection of memories. You have to carefully select what you put in and what you leave out. So then as a novelist, I had to look at all of these memories, all of these experiences that I've had in my life, and then think about what was I going to write about, well, what I wasn't going to write about. So I had to identify the plot points in my own life. And that was kind of hard because we don't walk around thinking about our lives in terms of plot points. But, I sat down and I looked at all of these events, all of these experiences I had gone through. And I realized that I did have plot points. And, a novel always begins with an inciting incident, right? Which is the event that upsets the status quo, that gets the changes the world in which the character lives. And I realized that I did have an inciting incident, and that inciting incident was the day that my mother left. Because prior to that, our status quo was that we were a poor family in Mexico. My father had already left, and my siblings and I lived with our mom, and that was our world, that was our life. And then the day came when my mother immigrated, and after that, our lives completely changed because then we had to go live with my evil grandma, and spend some pretty tough years living in that household. So I realized I did have an inciting incident, and that's why the book opens with my mother's departure. And of course, after that, as I was identifying the other plot points in the story, I realized that the border crossing was another important plot point. And in fact, that was the midpoint of the story I was trying to tell. And it was a perfect midpoint because I divided the book into two sections where the first half of the book is my life before the border crossing, and then the second half of the book is my life after the border crossing. So once I identified that midpoint of the story, it really helped me then to um, narrow down the narrative arc and the structure of the book. And of course, I finished the book with that ending where I leave Los Angeles to go to Santa Cruz to begin my journey as a university student. And I really wanted to end there because for me, it was important to give closure to the story, to the journey I had gone through as a child, but also leave the ending open to my next journey of being the first in my family to go to university, my journey towards becoming a published author. So I left the ending at a point where one journey ends and then the other begins. And once I did that, I was able to then write the book. And of course, there were some things that I couldn't remember, especially in the first part of the book where I was writing about my very early years. There were a few things like I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember the details. So then my older sister helped me out a lot. My sister Mago, who was 4 years older than me, and she was able to remember those early years, and she filled in the gaps in my memory. So I know that that's a question that I get asked a lot is, oh, how do you remember all of it? And it's like, well, I didn't remember all of it, but thankfully I had my siblings to help me out like they always do. So my sister Mago gave me a lot of her memories, and then my brother Carlos also gave me a lot of his memories. And together, between the three of us, we were able to piece together the first part of the book, the early years. The second part of the book was a little easier for me to write because by that point I was older and I could remember a lot more. And of course, I remember, a lot of, I feel that a lot of our defining moments in our lives, we remember them with a lot of clarity. And to me, in the second part of the book, like I didn't struggle as much to put the story together because I had a very good memory of those things. The other thing also I try to do in writing The Distance Between Us was to not just write what happened, but to show the reader how it felt. So it was really important to me to allow myself to go back into my past, into my memories, and not just experience them again, like just to write down, the events that happened, but I allow myself to relive all of those emotions that I had felt throughout, the years that I was writing about. And that made it very emotionally challenging because it's difficult. It was difficult enough to live through those moments the first time around. And it was very difficult to then have to relive those moments and feel that pain over and over again. So that was very challenging for me. But I realized that when I finished writing The Distance Between Us, I was really surprised in that by writing the memoir, instead of writing, another novel, it allowed me to confront my past in a way my fiction hadn't allowed me to do. It allowed me to, it forced me to be the protagonist of the story instead of creating, fictional characters to stand in for me. In this book, I had to be the protagonist of the story. So there was no hiding. I couldn't, put a distance between and the story through fiction. I had to relive it. I had to confront it. Um, and what that allowed me to do then was to come to a place of deeper understanding in a way that my fiction had allowed me to do. And it also allowed me to have more compassion too, for my parents, especially because in writing about my family, I had to look at them through the eyes of a writer, whereas usually, I look at my parents through the eyes of their daughter, and with that, of course, comes a lot of resentment and anger. So when I was forced to look at my parents through the eyes of the writer, it forced me to have to be a little bit more objective in the way I looked at them, in the way I studied them and learned everything about them. And I realized, that my parents were just human beings with all their flaws and all their virtues, and I had to learn how to acknowledge that and respect that, and treat them with compassion and give them the dignity that they deserve. So that also was another thing that I really appreciate about having written the memoir, because it brought me to a place of understanding, a place of compassion, and it allowed me to have a better relationship with my parents in a way I hadn't before. So these were some of the gifts that I had from the book. And of course, the other thing that I really enjoy about writing The Distance Between Us was that it allowed me a chance to relive all those beautiful moments between me and my sister Mago. Because now, as adults, our relationship is completely different because we're just sisters now. 4 years, we're 4 years apart. And when you're an adult, 4 years is nothing, right? So we are the same now. We're just sisters, we support each other, we help each other out. But the dynamic is completely different from when we used to be children, when she was more like a mother figure to me. And, she had to take care of me. And because I was little, I needed someone to take care of me. So the dynamic was completely different back then. And in writing The Distance Between Us, it really allowed me to revisit those beautiful memories, and just to see how our relationship used to be, that mother daughter relationship, and then just to appreciate my sister all over again, because I feel that I lucked out having such a wonderful older sister. And I also am very grateful to her, for giving up her childhood to become a mother to her siblings, and the way she always defended us and took care of us. I feel that that's one of the reasons why I survived what I survived, and why, today I'm not so traumatized and so broken by the experience, because I had her to protect me from a lot of that. So I have been able to heal from a lot of these things because of my sister, and the way that she kind of took the brunt, right, from a lot of the things that we had experienced. So that was another thing that I really enjoyed about writing the book. And of course, after I finished The Distance Between Us, I spent a few years traveling the country and talking about the book and talking about my family and my experiences. And people were always asking me, like, oh, what happened next? What happened next? So I would tell them stories about what happened next. And eventually I realized that I was writing another memoir, but orally. And then I decided, maybe I could write the follow up to The Distance Between Us. And that's when I wrote A Dream Called Home. And this is the fastest book I've ever written because I wrote it in a year, whereas, my other books have taken me like 4 years to write. But again, because I had spent several years talking about my life and my experiences, I had done a lot of the early work in terms of thinking about the stories and telling people about the stories. So I put the book together in a year, and it was really for me, it was so incredible to be able to, continue my story and to write about my experiences as a first generation college student. And I'm so grateful about that because there's so many, first gen Latino students in colleges and universities around the country. And it just made me feel really, really honored and grateful to be able to write about my own experiences as a first gen student and give a little bit of inspiration and encouragement to our young students today, and just give them that little push for them to continue on their educational journeys, and for them to get a little insight too into what to expect after graduation, and what not to do. Don't do what I did, and just stay focused and fight for your dream. So that was for me, something that inspired me to write the sequel to The Distance Between Us. So one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about, over the course of this past few years is just having a lot more gratitude for the circumstances that got me to where I am today. So there have been moments when I think about how close I came to not having the life that I have, to not being the person that I am today. And so, like some of those moments, for example, where when The Distance Between Us was published in Mexico, this is the Mexican version of The Distance Between Us. And it came out in Mexico a few years ago, and I was invited to come give some talks. And I was really proud because, I became a writer here in the US. I had been published here for 11 years before I was published in my native country. So when I went to Mexico to give talks on The Distance Between Us, it it was kind of bittersweet because, on one hand I was really excited to be able to share my writing and my books with my countrymen in Mexico, but it was also heartbreaking because in Mexico my book costs 200 pesos, and the daily minimum wage in Mexico is 100 pesos. So this book costs 200 pesos, which is 2 days worth of wages for a lot of people. So it made me think about how, in Mexico, even if people want to read, they can't because nobody's going to spend 2 days worth of wages on a book, right? So in Mexico, reading is a luxury that not many people can enjoy. And that experience of going to my country and realizing how much books cost, and how much people get paid, it just made me think so much about how when I was in Mexico, living in Guerrero, my family was really poor. We didn't have any books. I If I had stayed in Mexico, I would never have had access to books, which means I would not have become a reader. And by not becoming a reader, I would have never become a writer either. So there were no readers in my family in Mexico. And, my father only went to the third grade. My mother only went to the sixth grade. And my maternal grandfather was illiterate because he never went to school. So there were no readers in my family. There was no money to have the luxury of reading. And yeah, if I had stayed there, I would have not become a writer. So by immigrating, when my family and I came to live in Los Angeles, I had access to books through the public library near my house, and I would go there every week, borrow my 10 books that I was allowed to take out, and I would devour them and then come back for more. And that was how I developed my love for reading. And by becoming a reader, then I became a writer by, not just being satisfied to read books, but now I also wanted to write books. So I know that I came this close to never discovering my love of stories and never discovering my talent as a writer. So that's why I'm very grateful to public libraries. And I really wish that in Mexico, more and more public libraries existed, because I think about all the little Reinas living, in these poor communities who will never know the pleasure of being able to read books, and who will never know that they have talent to write those books. So that's something that I feel, I know that life in the US is not easy. There's a lot of challenges when you're an undocumented immigrant, or just an immigrant immigrant of color, whether you're documented or undocumented. It's challenging, and the American dream has become harder and harder to obtain. But I still believe, that this country offers opportunities that people like me would have never had in my own country. And for that, I am grateful, and for that, I have a deep gratitude for this country, because it was here where the writer in me was born. Maybe I was born in Mexico, but Reyna, the writer, was born in the United States. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. And I'm grateful to you all for reading my work and supporting the work of Latino writers. And I hope that you can continue to read more and more of our stories, and to celebrate with us all the wonderful things that immigrants give in this country, to this country, especially our passions and our skills and our talent. So thank you, everybody. I'm gonna open that up for questions now. I'm really looking forward to hearing any questions that you might have for me. Thank you.
Reyna, we have quite a few comments for you. I'll start with Alondra's. Her comment for you.
Ok. Yo me identifiqué contigo en tu vida de México. Mi hija se identificó cuando llegaste a la escuela a los Estados Unidos. Oh. Sí, muchas gracias. Esta experiencia que escribo de la inmigración es común, pero también es muy única para cada persona. Y me alegro saber que tú y tu hija se pudieron identificar con mi historia.
And we have one from Jesse for you, a comment.
Oh, thank you, Jessie. You write beautifully. I was deeply touched by your story and the way that you told it. Oh, thank you so much. it it takes a lot of effort to make the writing look effortless. That's something I always tell myself, and it took me so many drafts to get the book to look to how it looks now. But I feel that the writing is always in the rewriting, and I always remind myself, because my writing doesn't always come out beautifully. There are times when, if I show you my first drafts, you will be shocked of how terrible my writing can actually be. But as a writer, I try not to like censor myself and when I write. And usually the way I write is, I write first from my heart, and I just like let it all come out, the good, the bad, the ugly, and however it comes out, whether it's bad sentences, bad words, clunky, writing, but I'm writing from my heart. And once I'm done with the draft where I've just written from my heart, then I put on my writer's hat, and then I start to revise, and I start to polish, and I focus on the rhythm of the sentences and all of that. So I'm really happy though, because then, because of all the work that I put into the writing, then I get nice comments like yours, where you think that my writing is beautiful. So thank you.
Another one for you.
Oh, Kalamazoo, the way you reflected on your mom and dad was really humbling. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, it was such a eye-opening experience for me to write about my parents, because when I wrote about them, I realized that the way I write about my parents, it's with so much compassion and with so much understanding towards them. And I really appreciated that, because for a long time, I whenever I would interact with my parents, there was always that lingering resentment, that anger, right, beneath the surface. But now that I've written so much about them in these two memoirs, that has been removed. And of course, I talk about my dad like if he was still alive. My dad passed away almost 10 years ago, but I still have a relationship with him, and I still talk to him. He's in my head, and I feel that I can interact with my father in a more beautiful way than I did when he was still alive.
Okay. You have another one, another comment for you.
Ok, Jesús. Consejo para los niños de la comunidad que se pueden ver separados de sus padres o viceversa. Esa es una situación muy difícil por la separación familiar, pero mi consejo sería que primero los padres tienen que asegurarse de que ellos hagan todo lo posible para que entender a sus hijos, porque muchas veces después de la separación familiar, los niños tienen mucho resentimiento, la familia como que ya no se une tanto como antes. Hay problemas en la manera en que tienen interacciones. A veces los padres piensan que los niños son malagradecidos, no entienden el sacrificio que se tomó para emigrar. Entonces yo lo que recomiendo es de que los padres y también los hijos tengan mucha comunicación, traten de comprender de que las circunstancias sucedieron como sucedieron y a veces no tuvieron muchas opciones y los dos han hecho mucho sacrificio. Entonces traten de sanar la familia y vayan a terapia también. La terapia ayuda mucho para que puedan desahogarse y tratar de sanar esas heridas y ese dolor. Yeah, I'm not sure if you want me to translate, but I'll just do a really quick translation where the question was, what's my advice for the children in the community who might have been separated from their parents or vice versa. And for
Mhm.
me, when it comes to family separation, it's really traumatic, very traumatic. Even to this day, I'm still dealing with the trauma of the years that I spent apart from my parents. But what's important is to have a lot of communication, and to talk about it, and to for children to be able to express how they feel, and for parents to understand, what their children have gone through. I feel that something that happened like with my family was that we didn't have a lot of communication. My father never wanted to talk about what we had gone through. If we ever brought it up, he always said, you should be grateful about what I did for you. And we were grateful, but we were also very hurt. And we wanted to be able to express the hurt and be able to talk to him about what it was like for us, but he never wanted to talk about it. And I think that that's important in order for a family to heal from separation. You need to be able to talk and to have patience with each other, because healing is a process. And yeah, and there's gonna be, once in a while, there's gonna be a lot of hurt and anger, and parents need to be patient with their children.
And that kind of goes into what Jesse's been asked. If you have any suggestions on where to start.
Yeah, so find ways to get connected to issues surrounding immigration and poverty in Mexico and other countries, and find ways to help, but I'm not sure how. Do you have any suggestions of where to start? I would start with, first, look into your community and see if there are any local organizations in immigrant, rights organizations, nonprofits that you could, maybe volunteer at, or you can make donations, or you can work with them to raise funding to help other migrants. So start locally, maybe even churches too. Churches are always providing services to marginalized communities, to immigrant communities. So start within your own community first, and see if there are any organizations like that you can help out. You can also look into national organizations, immigrant rights organizations that you can connect with. And you can also try to find, there, so many organizations along the border, like there's No More Deaths is one nonprofit that I really like. They're based out in Tucson, Arizona, and they work a lot with the immigrant community, and they also do a lot of work along the border, where they bring out water, because there's so many migrants that perish during their crossings because of dehydration. So I had this really wonderful experience a few years ago. I went to a border delegation that was hosted by the Unitarian Universalist Church. It's the UU. It's called the UU College of Social Justice, and I signed up for this border delegation where I went down to Tucson, and they took us into the border, so we were able to like walk along the border, see the border wall. They took us across to talk to like migrant shelters, and that was a really eye-opening experience of like being able to talk to migrants and understand a little bit more of their experiences. And then they even had us talk to like the border patrol so that we can ask them questions about why they do what they do, and and to get a broader perspective too on the border and immigration issues. So that was one experience that I highly recommend to people. Um, that hopefully, next year they'll be able to start hosting those border delegations again. But it was such an eye-opening experience for me to do that.
We have some comments asking about where your sisters are now.
My sisters, well, my older sister Mago, she lives in Southern California, and she actually just got married a few days ago in Las Vegas. Uh, so she's having fun right now. She's having a good time. And my other sister Betty, she moved a few years ago to Vancouver, Washington, right across the Oregon border. So she's a little farther away from me, and she's actually the first one of us to leave California. But, California has become such an expensive state to live in that she decided to move to Washington, and that's where she was able to afford a house. And she really loves living there too. So that's where she's at. And my brother Carlos, he's also still in Southern California in Palmdale. So I don't get to see them that much anymore because I moved from LA about 5 years ago to Sacramento. And it's about, a 6 hour, 7 hour drive um, from LA to where I am. So we're kind of split up a little bit, which has been kind of sad because we don't spend as much time together anymore. And whereas before, we used to like spend like our kids' birthdays, having parties, family gatherings, all of that. So I really do miss that. And that was one of the downsides of moving to Sacramento, was being farther away from them.
We have a question about the versions of your memoir.
The versions, the young adult and then the adult version.
And in Spanish.
Mm-hmm. Ya, diferencias significantes entre las versiones inglés y español, y en cómo lo escribiste. Oh, sí. Um, la versión original, la Distance Between Us, la escribí en inglés y luego hicimos la traducción en español. Y cuando hice la versión juvenil, le quité algunas secciones que no eran muy apropiadas para esta edad. Entonces le quité varios capítulos y escenas, pero cuando le quité esas cosas también le agregué cosas nuevas. Entonces hay momentos en este libro de mi vida que no están en la versión original. Entonces, ese es un cambio que le hice. Y la versión en español de este libro es el amarillo, La distancia entre nosotros. Esta es la versión en español de la versión juvenil. Entonces, puedes compartir este libro con tus estudiantes. Yeah. So the question is, what's the difference between the English and the Spanish version of The Distance Between Us? The difference is that when I did the adaptation, I had to remove some inappropriate content for young readers. So I took out a few scenes that are in the book, or even some chapters as well. I also condensed a lot. So, like, if chapter 1 was like 15 pages, I condensed it to 7 or 8 pages. So I went line by line, getting rid of extra words. That was a really interesting experiment, because when I write books for adults, I don't have to worry too much about the word count. I could make the book, as long as I want usually. But with the young readers version, I had a word limit, and I had to stick to the word limit. So then I had to cross out paragraphs, cross out entire, scenes to get down to that word limit. But I cut so much that then I had a little room to add things. So I ended up adding, I ended up adding more things that are not in the original. Like there's a scene in this book where when we took the bus from Mexico City to Tijuana, and the bus left my father along the way. He got off to buy us breakfast, and the bus driver took off without him. And then we woke up and we're in a bus on our way to Tijuana, and my father was not on the bus, and we freaked out and we started crying, and my dad had to take a cab to catch up to us. So that scene, that moment is not in the original because I had to cut out some things. The book was getting very long, so I put it in this book instead. And I also expanded a little bit on my border crossing. I added my prom because I thought young people would be interested in when I had my prom and what that was like. So yeah, I was able to add a few more things in the new version, in the young readers version.
And what about, we have one asking about your relationship with your children.
With my children, yeah, so the question is, la relación con las mujeres de tu vida, abuela Vila, abuelita Chinta, tu mamá, ¿cómo han afectado la relación con tus propios hijos? Pues yo creo que la relación con mi mamá me ayudó a ser mejor mamá con mis hijos, porque yo no quiero ser el tipo de madre que mi madre fue conmigo. Yo quiero darles a mis hijos un poco más amor, los abrazo, los beso, siempre estoy con ellos, los apoyo mucho. Yo tengo una relación muy bonita con mi hijo y con mi hija, con los dos. He tratado de pues darles mucho cariño y mucho apoyo. Algo que pues mis padres no supieron darme. Les he dado un hogar estable, un hogar con mucho amor, y no han necesitado nada, nunca han sufrido carencias. Les he dado lo que necesitan. Y para mí, pues a veces me preocupa porque mis hijos nunca han sufrido, ellos no saben sufrir, y a veces me preocupan porque yo sé que el mundo puede ser cruel con nosotros, y bueno, pues yo creo que mis hijos no están preparados para nada, para sufrir. Entonces, en ese caso, creo que les he fallado. Y eso sí, que mis padres sí que me enseñaron a sufrir. Yeah. So the question is, how has your relationship with the women in your family affected your relationship with your children? And I said that with my relationship with my mom has actually helped me to be a better mom to my children, because I don't want to be the kind of mother that my mother was to me. I try to be a loving mother, a supportive mother, and I have a really good relationship with both my kids. I give them a lot of love, a lot of support. I've given them a very loving home, a very stable home. They've never had to deal with being separated from me, or having a broken home. They've had a very stable, loving home all of their lives. And the only thing I'm worried about is that they haven't learned how to suffer. They've had it so easy all of their lives. I provided for them and giving them, a comfortable life. And yeah, they just don't know how to suffer. And I worry about them sometimes because, the world can be cruel to us, and if we don't know how to handle that cruelty, I don't know. So that in that regard, my parents really did prepare me for the world, because they taught me how to suffer, and it takes skill, to be able to um to get up every single day despite all the obstacles that you encounter. You have to learn how to believe in yourself and get up and go fight your battles every single day. So do worry about my kids that they might not know how to fight battles.
And lastly, is there a movie in the works for your
Oh,
memoir?
oh yeah. Well, in my dreams there is. Hopefully one day it'll be real. I mean, I feel that recently I have seen some really great news coming out of Hollywood with some Latina writers selling their books, and Erika Sanchez, who wrote Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. That was just announced that Netflix is making a movie of her book. And then one of my favorite books from last year, Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, it was just announced that Hulu is turning that into a TV
Ooh.
series. So yeah, so maybe now's the time for Latina writers to be able to break into Hollywood, because that has been a really big challenge. Not the publishing industry is really, really difficult to break into when you're a writer of color, but Hollywood is even worse, because out of all the books that get adapted to film or to TV, they're all usually white writers, right? It's books by white writers who have those opportunities, and very rarely do you see a Latino book being adapted for the big screen. But one of the books that gave me hope was this one here. Let me show you. um, Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya. He had to wait 40 years
Oh,
before
wow.
his book got made into a movie. 40 years. And when the movie was finally, made a few years ago, I said, "Oh, there's hope for me yet. Maybe in 40 years I'll see my work on the big screen." But maybe I don't have to wait that long. We'll see. Yeah, keep your fingers crossed for me.
Okay. And is there a way for people to get in contact with you with their questions and comments that you haven't answered this evening?
Yes, my website is reynagrande.com, and I have my email there and the contact page. So you're welcome to email me anytime if you have any questions. And I also have a few other events that I have coming up. So if you want to join me in more conversation, you could check out my events page so you can see what else I'm going to be doing.
Okay. And everyone, I've linked her website in the comment area below. Hop back on.
Yeah, but thank you so much, everybody. And I do want to let you know that I have a book coming out at the end of this year, so I need to make sure I mention that so that you can put that on your calendar. It's going to be coming out in December, and it's an anthology called "Somewhere We Are Human," an anthology of migration, survival, and new beginnings. And it's an anthology that I co-edit, and all of our contributors, including the two editors, myself and my co-editor, were all undocumented or formerly undocumented immigrants. So these are the voices that we wanted to highlight in the anthology. And even the cover is being made by an undocumented immigrant as well. So for me, this is a project that I really, really love. and I hope that you're able to pick it up when it comes out. I'll
Mhm.
put up the information in my website too, so that you can see when it's coming out.
Right, I have that written in my notes, so we'll have it, everyone. Put your holds on it. And again, Reyna, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And everyone, thank you for attending our 16th Battle Creek Reads, where our theme this year is ties that bind us. And don't forget to pick up Reyna's memoir if you haven't read it, as well as our next read, A Woman is No Man. And stay tuned to hear from the author, Etaf Rom, next month, April 13th. All right.
Wonderful.
Wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.